come back. I've come back to Compton. Well, not Compton itself, the village that I was at as part of my Sussex Borderland exploration. I've come back to a point above Compton Hangar, where I noticed on the old maps, and indeed on the current OS map, two interesting things that I wanted to investigate. One was Telegraph Hill, where the old Telegraph post used to be, which is further along from where I am. And here, right at the corner of the hangar, is where this strange object is, an earth mound. It's a long barrow. It's Bevis thumb. I grant you, from ground level, it's very difficult to actually see it and work out what it is. But from up in the sky, I flew my drone, of course, to see a better look at it. You get the sense of this long barrow, and I believe it's the longest long barrow in Sussex, and it's here. This, I guess, is the east end of it. It runs east-west. It's fascinating. I don't know why it's called Bevis thumb, whether Bevis was a local dignitary here, or a chieftain maybe, that the name has just kept, or whether it's because it's at the thumb of a field or the corner of a field, whether it was named after the farmer who found it, who knows? Somebody may well know, but that's what it's called, Bevis thumb. There is another Bevis connected with Neolithic long barrows. I just can't remember where I've heard that before. But anyway, this is at the tail end. I mean, it's here, it's preserved, and it's not terribly damaged by when they built the road, which is adjacent to us here. So it's all in good shape, scheduled of course. But blink and you wouldn't know it was here at all.
At one time, the landscape was peppered with these ancient mounds. Now, very few survive. The Barrow runs just under 200 feet long, tapering in width from 50 to 30 feet. Oh, and I later found out that it was named after a legendary giant.
I'm going to clamber up onto the top, and as I do so, just have a look at the ridge here. In actual fact, there are tractor, amazingly, there are tractor prints going across it, which I find a little odd. When it was investigated, as indeed it was, they were bones found inside. It's interesting to think of a long barrow here in Sussex, because very much you think of Wiltshire as being the capital of Neolithic man, but of course ancient man, let's call him that for the moment, was all over the country, particularly in the south and the southeast, as well as the southwest. And we have these sites which sadly most of them have now gone over the 4,000 odd years, whatever it is, since these ancient burial mounds were put up. Over the years they weren't respected, of course, farmers not really having a clue what they were. They were in the way of their fields and they would dig them out and get rid of them. And it's only really relatively recently, in the last 100, 200 years, that we've given much credence to these ancient sites and known just how important they are for us to tell us something of our history. So it's absolutely brilliant that it's here, that it's marked on the map and is being left alone. So who was buried here and why? These are, of course, huge questions of which there is much debate. I'm no expert at all, but clearly Neolithic people were buried. Families, I think, is what most people have come to the conclusion are buried here. And according to numerous books, and I've read a few of them, some of these people, it's just their bones, that their bodies in some cases were left outside of the barrows and were cleaned by birds, pecked clean, and then just certain bones buried within. But I don't know that we will ever really know. Archaeologists have their theories, armchair archaeologists and historians will have theirs. But unless we've got a time machine, I don't think that we can ever fully understand. Always it's the same old thing. These things have been built for ritual purposes, death and ritual, which may be the most logical reason. But one likes to have an open mind, and maybe there is something else. I don't have any other suggestions, but they are fascinating and absorbing objects on the landscape, and they evoke mystery and imagination, and I love them. One of the most famous long barrows, of course, is that one in Wiltshire, the West Kennet Long Barrow. And I've been there, made a video about it, and if I remember I'll link to it in the description. And at the front of that is some enormous sarsen stones, great big stones, megalithic tomb it is. Now, whether this had any stones here, I don't know. The sarsen stones do turn up in Sussex from time to time, but it doesn't seem to me in any great number. So it's debatable whether they had that or whether there was a timber entrance and the whole thing would have been shored up with timber, oaks maybe, to keep it there. And then eventually all completely buried. The other question is, we see it now covered in grass, but we are in the chalky fields, just like in Wiltshire, and back then they used to have them blazoning white so that they could be seen for miles around. And it is conceivable that much of the landscape that we see now is pretty much similar, but perhaps a lot of these trees in the hangar in front of me weren't here, so that it could be seen from the hills opposite. Well, it's time for me to leave Bevis Thumb and head up towards Telegraph Hill. It's interesting actually, just as I leave and I look at it from a slightly distant perspective, is that it's not on the highest point. So there are hills higher as I'm going up to Telegraph Hill, which will obviously demonstrate that, and hills beyond behind me on that direction. Now, it's interesting that such a prominent long barrow isn't there necessarily to be seen for miles. It's on this track here, which I don't know whether it has any ancient status or not, but possibly it is. And sometimes these barrows, from what I understand, were positioned as markers so that you got to know the landscape, or if you were a visitor on long distance pilgrimages back during the Neolithic times, which of course people did, selling their wares and bringing interesting things to the communities, as has always gone on, then maybe they were important markers to tell you that you arrived in somebody else's territory. up the hill now, Telegraph Hill, to where the telegraph post, a relay post, more about that in a moment. But as we climb and we start to see more of the landscape around us and the hills to my west, a few cyclists whizzing past as well over there, we can see just how exposed it is up here. Of course, you often think of hill forts with Neolithics. Now, I think the hill forts are much more associated, and I may be wrong, you can correct me, with the Iron Age period, the latter end of the Neolithic peoples. But one of the things that I've discovered over the last year or so, when I've been reading up more about Neolithic times, is just how much of the landscape was cut back from the wild wood of forest and tangle of all the different trees, and by the Iron Age and stroke the Anglo-Saxon period, or when the Romans came in even, much of the landscape that we see now, the fields and the hedgerows, were already established. A lot of people make the assumption that it was still a quagmire and a tangle of impassable, boggy land down at the bottom of the hills, and it was only at the top of the hills that it was inhabited. That's not strictly true, although of course over time, over the last few thousand years, a lot of the wider rivers and basins and things have silted up, and the coastline has changed from my understanding. But there were more people than we generally think here, and they were farming, and they were pretty well established. Come up to a hedge now, and I think behind this hedge is Telegraph House. I don't know, but I've vaguely seen pictures of what looks like a Georgian building. I don't know if that's true. Bit windy now. I don't know if we're ever going to see a picture of it, but we'll get to the end of this hedge here and see if we can grab a glimpse before we explore why it's here. And the answer is no. As I suspected, we just won't see it. But behind there, on that point there, was, presumably on that point there, well, there it is, we can just about make out, I haven't got a long lens, I don't want to spy on them, but that's Telegraph House. I've just come back away from Telegraph House so that I can get this view here, which is looking eastwards, but slightly southeastwards, probably down towards, I'm guessing, Portsmouth. And that's the purpose of this hill and the purpose of Telegraph House. Ingenious and very clever system, very simple as well. I think originally developed by the French, but we picked it up, copied it and made it, I guess, better. I'm going to say that, but it may not be true. So there's this wonderful book called Send It by Semaphore, which I read about 5 or 6 years ago. Fantastic book. Tells the story of how the Admiralty realised that they could send messages and receive messages from London in Admiralty House down to the port here at Portsmouth, which of course was a very important port, in a number of seconds. I'm almost as quick as a text. I mean, it's remarkable. So they had a system, a chain of semaphore systems, sort of flags, if you like, on a building on the tops of hills. and using a telescope trained on the hill that you had to receive from and the hill that you would send to, a series of semaphores for letters of the alphabet, like a Morse code if you like in a way, could be sent across the land, and messages could be sent bang, 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 down from London to Portsmouth. An incredible feat, so simple. Obviously, weather had to be pretty good. Didn't have to be brilliant, but it had to be pretty good for that to work. It would take a day, I think, or a day and a half for a horse and a rider to send that message ordinarily. So to be able to send a message, typing out each letter over a period of, I suppose, 10 minutes to get perhaps all the letters in. Each letter, I think there's a ridiculous time of, I think it was something like 17 or 18 seconds to relay at the fastest ever moment a letter down, so that, you know, if you were writing make ready for the Admiral and you did the letter M, M might take 17 seconds. And so a simple message might be conveyed in a matter of simple minutes. And so here there was such a station. Gone now, a house, private residence, no doubt, somebody living in it. But the history is there. I'm walking back to the van. Just met a couple of ladies on horseback coming up. Didn't feel appropriate to suddenly whip the camera out and take a picture, so apologies that you can't see them. But one of them, I should have asked their names, but one of them said, "Oh, I follow you on Facebook." So I thought that was very nice. And we had a conversation about what I was doing and etc., as you do. And I thought it was very lovely. Invariably when I'm out and about, it's amazing, I can be all sorts of different parts of the county. People now beginning to recognise me, which is a strange thing, I have to admit. But the thing what I wanted to mention really, the reason I've mentioned this, is I've also seen a number of cyclists. Well, of course, cyclists are hurtling along. The horse riders were just walking their horses, so they were able to stop and engage in conversation, which is lovely. I love to have a conversation with people as you're going along. Cyclists, on the other hand, often don't. They're too busy, head down, going, doing their exercise. I'm not blaming them, that's not casting any aspersions. Sometimes, if you're lucky, you get a good morning. Often a walker, if you come across a walker, they're often intrigued by me carrying a tripod and a camera. So it is interesting, isn't it, the different types of people that you meet and how many of them are actually willing to engage in conversation. Right, I'm nearly back at the van. I think I'm going to move the van. It's on a strange angle, and then find a spot to have a cup of coffee and think about where I'm going next.
The roads are narrow and quiet in this part of the world. It's Sunday and barely anyone is about, which suits me very much. I didn't go far, just on the opposite hill to Compton, a little to the west. At the lay-by, there were signs saying no tipping. Sadly, they must have a problem with that menace in these parts.
Here we go. The kettle is boiled. It's time for a coffee. And I haven't brought any milk with me, so I'm going to have it black. This is lovely, I love this. Other cars go whizzing past, but I pause to have a coffee. Look at that. And I have some chocolate biscuits. Perfect. Do you know, I love my van. I absolutely love my van. And I love the ability the van gives me to stop and just take in the scenery, like where I am. I might be on the side of a road. It's not a particularly busy road, I'm pleased to report. And I can have a cup of coffee, I can take it easy, and I can throw up the drone, which is what I have been doing.
The drone is a great asset to my filmmaking, but I don't want to overuse it. But it does give a great perspective to the landscape. There, to the right of the screen, is the tiny village of Compton, and above it, Telegraph Hill and the Long Barrow. Looking west, we see the incredible patchwork of field systems and hedgerows, some of which date back to early man, I'm sure.
Yeah, this is fantastic. Obviously, much fun with somebody else like the lovely Julia to share the experience with. But just getting away from the rat race, absorbing the scenery, absorbing the nature, and being at peace with oneself, I find is something I need actually during the period of my life that I'm in. I mean, you know, I'm middle-aged, I've got to admit it. And sometimes that rat race that one is in to earn money, to pay mortgages and all of that, you get so absorbed in it. Sometimes just taking in the natural environment and relaxing is so important. And when you're here with the environment and the landscape, start to appreciate maybe what those Neolithic people, those farmers and early man must have been like. You know, if you can find a place that's quiet. Not so easy here with cars coming along. Here's another one. And it's only when I'm filming do they come. But those early man tilling the fields, subsistence farming, just managing to get by. And it's such a long way from our over-manufactured trinkets and irrelevant stuff in our lives that we now seem to fill up. But this van, definitely a relevant thing, and this cup of coffee, very important after a day's filming. Cheers. Well, that's another video done. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to follow, like, subscribe, become a patron, support what I do, and I'll continue to make these videos. The next Borderland video will take me up probably into Lady Holt Park. And there's a story connected with smugglers. But more on that next time. Till then, bye-bye.